Welcome back to Gloved Up Garage. It's cold out here. I got the heater going. You guys saw me drag that piece through the snow to get it in here. And basically what that is the metal that I need to finish up the apron, the upper rail, and the little corner bracket on the core support on my son's 94 GT. If you didn't check out the last video I did on this car, I took what was left of the core support off. We bought this car smashed over here in the right front corner. He did a pretty good job removing some of the damaged stuff that I needed out of the way, and I got the core support off, and I'm going to kind of finish up the metalwork for him. It's overwhelming to him, so I'm going to take care of it and walk him through the process. He's going to do some of the welding, but I'm going to do the heavy lifting on the metal side. So I've got to go through and get this all straightened up and ready for my donor parts, because when I come over here to this side, I need to put the apron in here, and it comes up and over this, I guess, upper rail extension. So I've got to get this straightened out. In all reality, I could cut that off with my donor piece and butt weld it in here and make it work. But this one isn't too bad. It looks pretty smashed, but I can get this straightened out. A little bit of dolly and hammer work, a little bit of bending. We can make this good. It's not really going to be seen ever again once the wheel well is in place. Fender comes over top of it. You'll never see this ever again. It doesn't need to be perfect. The frame rail is good and straight, so I don't need to worry about anything there other than going through and cleaning up these spot welds from where the apron wraps down to the frame rail. So these two pieces absolutely have to be in place before I can put his new core support on. Just like you see on this side, the upper rail extension is right here and the apron is right here, and they meet up to the core support. Once I'm done with that metal work, I can come out here and work on the ends of the frames and get them kind of cleaned up and straightened and ready to go. Then we're going to go through the engine bay, get all the wiring out of the place, and get everything ready, because we're going to wind up painting the engine bay when we do all this work. So hang in there with me. I'm going to have the heater on today while I do all this, and I'm going to get to work on this thing. So I've got my donor piece here, and one thing that I need to be careful of when I'm thinking about how this needs to come apart is how I'm going to put it back together, and what welds am I going to try to preserve, what welds am I going to absolutely just destroy and drill straight through. Well, a lot of that's going to depend upon the underlying metal. I know I'm going to get rid of whatever's left of this core support. and I know that I'm not going to use the frame rail. So on the inside of the apron here, where it meets the frame rail, I can just drill those straight out with no problem. On the core support where it meets the rail here, I can drill those out with no problem. On the flip side, on the bottom side, I can do the same thing. I could probably just actually use the belt sander in here because, like I mentioned, it's too shallow to really get a drill in here and get at a good angle without tearing a bunch of stuff up. So belt sander, I would just buzz right through these welds, no problem. And I'll probably do the same thing over here on the frame rail on the outside and, well, the inside of the rail and the outside of the rail. I'll just use that belt sander to burn right through because I'm not concerned about the rail and I'm not concerned about the core support. However, up here, I need this corner bracket like I took off on the driver's side. So I'm gonna have to be really careful because also this corner bracket has my bolt for the hood strut, and I believe there's a ground or something, not a hood strut, but the hood prop. I don't know if this car particularly uses it, but we'll definitely, you know, save this bracket. If we don't wind up needing that, I can just always cut it off. We've got a couple of spot welds out here on the outside we're gonna need to be careful about also, because on the bottom side of this is our upper rail right here, and I need to make sure that I keep this because we don't have this. It was mashed on the other car. This was completely wadded up and folded over. Yeah, I've got a lot I got to do to even get this thing remotely ready. So enough of me blabbing about this. I'm going to throw it in the time lapse and just go after this thing with a drill bit and see where that gets me. So this is where that section is going to weld in. I know I said bolt in, but we're going to weld it in here. I'm going to clean up all the spot welds on the top of the frame rail, clean up what's left of the spot welds and the apron on the strut tower. And then up here at the top is going to be the most difficult part. I've got to make a couple of decisions here. The outer part of this is a bracket that goes all the way up here to the cowl. Obviously, I'm going to clean all the surface rust off of this. But I've also got to drill out all these spot welds and get this separate so that I can straighten it out and then straighten out this lower piece. Now, our donor section with the upper rail on it actually has a piece of the upper rail that comes underneath of this and spot welds on somewhere in this area. We did not get that off of this car because it was so mashed up here. There was no good way to get under here and drill out those spot welds. So we wound up cutting it off. Now the problem we're gonna have and where I've got to make that decision is where am I going to butt weld this up to the new piece of metal that goes on here. And I'll kind of set it up here and show you what I'm talking about. So now I've got the donor piece laid up here. I do need to remove what's left of the strut tower, and I'll probably go ahead and cut off this outer piece because I can use it as a guide on how straight this is. And then worst case scenario, I can always come to like here and cut this, and down here do the same thing, measure off where these holes are, and then just cut in and splice in this section here, do a couple of butt welds across this, and then spot weld at the top, which I may wind up doing because that actually makes more sense than to try to straighten this thing out and get it straight when I've already got a good bracket. So I'll work on that. got to remove what's left of the strut tower up here at the top. And then that lower section that's in here, that's bent down right here, that may be okay in our donor piece. And I can't remember if we actually cut this off or if he drilled out some spot welds, because I see a big spot weld hole here, which will probably be somewhere in the area of here on the donor part. So it's possible that this may be okay. We just need to bend it up. And when I get it free from this, it'll be a lot easier to move. Well, I have been drilling and grinding and cutting like crazy to get all of this stuff apart, and I'm at a good spot now where I feel like I've made some pretty good progress. From here, it's just a matter of cleaning everything up, taking some measurements, and then from there I can start to weld this thing back together and make it look like a car again. So the part that I'm holding here in my hand, this is like the bottom side of this front rail that's formed by the apron. This reinforcement that goes back to the strut tower, and it all kind of comes together to make that upper rail structure. One thing I kind of figured out is that I'm going to have to splice in this reinforcement, I guess you could call it. The one on the car is bent. If I cut off that outer bracket like I talked about in one of the previous clips, I could get this straight and I could use it. But we cut it somewhere in here during the process of disassembly. I think what I can do is take some measurements off of the part that we cut and then mark a good spot on our donor piece, make a cut, and just do like a butt weld to put it back together. And that will at least get us, this little extension that we need to go out to that upper rail to provide some more support, because this is my son's car. I want it to be as safe as I possibly can. So I don't want to cut too many corners, especially when it comes to something like this that provides structure and does have a little bit of support in a crash. So, who knows, maybe this 6 inches of metal really wouldn't make much of a difference, but it makes me feel a little better about the repair knowing that I took that effort to make it right. This is going to be the hardest part, is welding this part to this. From there, and I say it's hard because I need to make sure that I keep my angle correct. I made sure that I did not change this angle right here. This flange can be manipulated. This flange can be manipulated. Same way with this. I don't really mind those flanges too much because I can straighten those out. But this angle right here is vital because I need it to match what's already on the car to make sure that I have everything going forward lined up correctly. Went ahead and straightened out what was left of this bend spot. Now, normally I could probably reuse it, but with that rip right there and the deformity and all that stuff, it just makes sense to go ahead and cut it off because I still need to get the rest of this on my donor piece, this whole extension that doesn't exist on the car anymore. So what I've done is I took some measurements basically from these holes, and then kind of figured out where I'm going to make my cut. I'm going to go ahead and cut across the back of this hole. That'll give me about 16 millimeters there. Verified my measurement on this car to make sure that it's the same, which it is. So I will go ahead and make my cut right here across. and then I'll cut this off of my donor spot, fix this little flange here, get this all cleaned up. I've already kind of straightened a little bit of this because I was doing some test fits, just wanted to make it look a little nicer. I'm going to go ahead and cut this, and then cut that, get them ready to weld together. Cut wound up being pretty much perfect. There's a couple little bitty spots that aren't touching, but it's like less than a 1/16 of an inch, probably like a 32nd. Good enough to jump that gap with a, a MIG welder. The angle is pretty much spot on. The front's drooping just a little bit up here because it's got a lot of weight on it. I've just got that one clamp. But you saw me kind of gauging the angles of this together. What I'll probably do is come up with some sort of flat stock, come back here and clamp it, and then clamp it here so that it maintains the correct angle while I'm welding this joint right here, because I don't want it to warp, and I definitely don't want it to droop. And I might even flat stock the flange up here at the top, because I know it doesn't look like it on camera, but this flange actually aligns with this flange here. So I might clamp a few things in place, like the upper rail, maybe the apron, just to give myself some support while I weld this in, and then kind of take everything back apart to kind of finish up welding. I will need to get some weld through primer. I thought I had some, but I'm out. I need to clean up a lot of the stuff over here on this frame rail and get it ready for the rest of our donor parts. But we've made pretty good progress so far. So I'm going to continue to kind of clean up this extension. I'm going to clean up my upper rail, clean up my apron, and then I'll come down here onto the actual frame rail, start to clean up some of this stuff down here, and I'm going to throw this on time lapse and get to it, because that's enough of me talking about it. Let's get it done. Well, I know it looks like we made some pretty decent progress because the core support's up here, but it's just sitting here. It's pretty loose. The apron's still loose. I'm just doing some rough measurements and just checking to see if there's anything I need to fix before I start the process of building this apron. And there is. I need to be able to rotate this in, and I need to get it a little deeper into the frame rails. And I'll show you guys on some B-roll of what I'm talking about, but those vertical flanges where the core support welds to the frame rails on each side, I've got to tweak those a little bit because they're a little wavy, they're too far forward, and I can't get my core support deep enough into the frame. So I'm going to work on that. Also wanted to make sure that my flanges out here where the aprons meet are in relatively the right area and the right shape. It looks like they are. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this back off. And yeah. I need to make sure that that doesn't get damaged, but these flanges right here are what I'm talking about. I've got to do a bunch of work to those. The ends of the frame rails are wavy as could be too. You saw how hard it was to get this to pop off. In theory, it should be a little tighter, but that's something I got to work on. All right, I'm going to throw some gloves on and get to work. Well, my time-lapse video failed. I don't know why I didn't record, but I time-lapsed me putting this extension panel on, and this is where I had cut and welded now this extension on that was completely mangled up and crumpled in the accident. I still need to clean up a couple of welds, but for what this is and where it's at, this is going to be really good. I'll shoot this with more of the etch primer that you see, or not etch primer, but the weld through primer. That's what the silver stuff is that's all along here. That's the weld through. I did that while I was doing the time lapse, but again, it just didn't record for some reason. So I'll have to make sure that it's actually recording from now on. And this is kind of disappointing because this is a new phone. So All right, I'm gonna shoot this with the weld through and then get the next piece ready to go. I think the next part I'm gonna put on is the extension that comes out here underneath the apron. That will kind of determine how the apron is gonna go on, because the apron will weld down here at the bottom and then over here onto the core support, and it will bring the height where it needs to be. Now, before I weld in the apron to this structure, when I get it done, I have to set the core support back up here so that I can get everything correct. So I'm just doing some more test fitting to make sure everything is good. This is the outer cap, if you want to call it that, the extension that I've made fit the car. I've got it coated with my weld through primer. When I start welding this in, I have to be kind of careful, because this, what's left of that cap on the car, needs to come out a little bit more, and this just needs a little bit of tweaking. So because of all the weight that's out here on this rail, it's kind of drooping in the front, which means that this is not really lining up where it needs to be. So I've got to get it lined up here at the top and then kind of push up on the bottom, do a couple of welds to make sure it stays. And then at that point, I can come in to the bottom down here and weld in a couple of spot welds there. Now, I won't be able to truly get this rail extension welded because it overlaps a lot of the apron. But with that outer cap on there and a couple of welds on the bottom side, it should at least hold it in place while I start the process of getting the apron fitted. And like I mentioned in the previous clips, I'm not going to weld in the apron just yet until I get the core support on, just to make sure everything falls where it needs to and I can still make some adjustments. Once all that is in, I'll clamp the core support to the apron and start my welding process. Walk you through what I've done so far. I started to weld the cap on what was, the newer section of the cap, and then I started building out the apron and some of the bracing and stuff like that. I went ahead and put the core support up here, and what I found is that I wasn't really happy with the angle and the height of the apron compared to the core support. This bracket should pretty much drop into place, which it does. You can see the bracket, it sits a little high when you flatten it out on the core support in comparison to the apron. So the apron actually needs to go, well, what I thought was up, but I figured out it's the core support that's off. If you look over here on the driver's side, this drops in place just perfect. That tab sits about an inch below the top line of the apron. And then the main thing to look at is where the frame rail meets the bumper bracket. The bottom of the frame rail is roughly a ½ inch taller than the bumper bracket. But if you come over here to the passenger side, it's the opposite, or pretty much flush. So my core support needs to come down. When it comes down, this tab will drop below the top of the apron, which is going to put it right where it needs to be. From there, I can start to build out that upper rail that goes under the apron. And finally, get done welding this apron and everything together. I'm going to go ahead and call it for this video. It's kind of stretched out a little further than I'd hoped it would. I made pretty good progress on getting everything ready, welding up some of the structure that I need. And now I'm to the point where I really need to be precise about how I'm doing this. So I need to order a tram gauge. Unfortunately, it's going to take probably a week for that to get here. This whole process that you've seen has taken me about 3 weeks in this video from start to finish, just because I haven't had a lot of time to dedicate on this. I could come out here for a few hours here and there, jump on it, get a few things done, and then also had to go get welding gas and a bunch of other stuff. Of course, the weather hasn't been very good. It's pouring rain out there now. But I'm to the point where this should go back together a lot quicker than it has to this point. Now that everything is prepped and ready to weld, I just need to make those measurements, burn in the few parts that I need, and then at that point I can get the core support back on and get it welded in. And then that's pretty much it, other than going through and prepping this for paint, which I will show you all how to do that in a new future episode of Gloved Up Garage. So if this is the kind of thing that you like to watch, definitely hit that subscribe button, hit the bell icon to be notified when I upload videos. I have tried so hard to get on a schedule, but unfortunately life just happens and I'm not able to do that right now. So I will upload videos as I have time and availability. Hang in there with me. This isn't an easy process. I do this by myself. I don't have a fancy editor. I shoot all the clips, I edit all the clips, and I post everything, and I respond to all of the comments and all that stuff by myself. I don't have a fancy media team. So I appreciate each and every one of you for watching and supporting the channel, and remember to stay gloved up.